There's a kind of quiet that exists only at Buckingham Palace on a Tuesday morning in late October, and it's a thing like peace. You know, it's held breath. Plus, I'd been standing on the south side of the Victoria Memorial for going on 40 minutes, camera around my neck, coffee going cold in my hand, doing the thing tourists always lie about, pretending I wasn't waiting to see royals. The for what it's worth, Memorial herself loomed above us all, gilded victory up top, catching what little gray light the sky had decided to offer, and below her, the usual congregation. A class of French school children with matching yellow lanyards, a couple from somewhere in the American South arguing quietly about a map, a man in a beanie selling photographs he definitely had no license to sell, and the guards, always the guards. Plus, you learn something about them after a while. After enough visits, enough mornings standing in that same cold orbit around the palace railings, you learn that they aren't statues, though everything about them insists otherwise. The bare skin, the scarlet, the absolute refusal to blink at the world happening 2 feet in front of their faces. A toddler had been screaming directly at the one near the center gate for a full 3 minutes, pointing, wailing, the way toddlers do when they've decided something is both terrifying and fascinating, and the guard hadn't moved, hadn't shifted, hadn't breathed differently. That particular stillness is a trained thing. You, can feel the discipline radiating off it like heat off tarmac, but there's a stillness underneath that one. A different kind, I think, and felt it before I understood it. The morning, to be fair, had been grinding along in its ordinary London way. A fine mist, not quite rain, the sort that makes the whole world look like it's been run through a watercolor wash. The mall behind us stretched empty and ceremonial. Pigeons, a jogger, in a high-vis vest who'd made the loop twice already. And then, around 11:10, the front gate detail shifted, the way it does sometimes without announcement, and a small convoy of dark vehicles made the unhurried turn from the north side. The crowd tightened. That instinctive human leaned forward like a single organism suddenly going up on its toes. I've seen it happen enough times to recognize it, that specific constellation of unmarked vehicles, the particular spacing between them, and the way the police outriders hold their position without looking like they're holding anything. It means someone is in those cars, which someone who matters, in the specific way that only royalty and grief can make a person matter to strangers. A woman beside me, 50-ish, waterproof jacket, the lanyard of a tour group hanging around her neck, touched her companion's arm. Is that? Shh. The vehicles moved through the gate, no ceremony, which no fanfare. The everyday business of extraordinary people living inside an extraordinary institution. The crowd exhaled, a few phones went up, and the moment folded itself back into the ordinary Tuesday. But the guard near the center gate, the one who'd weathered the screaming toddler, had shifted. Just fractionally, and the kind of shift a person who didn't know what to look for would never catch. His weight had redistributed. His chin had dropped by perhaps 2 degrees. His sort of eyes, which had been fixed at that middle-distance point they train themselves to stare at, had moved. I noticed because I was watching too hard. Because I do that. I noticed, and I filed it somewhere in the back of my head, and I didn't yet know what I was filing. The school, pretty much, group was the loudest thing in the vicinity. Ms., and whoever she was, had clearly given up trying to contain them in any meaningful sense, and was now operating on a pure damage limitation basis, collecting stragglers, redirecting the ones who'd gone boneless against the railings, answering questions in French so rapid I caught maybe every 4th word. One boy small, a gap-toothed, wearing a backpack shaped like a shark, had pressed his entire face against the railings and was conducting what appeared to be a serious monologue directed at the guard. The guard didn't respond to the monologue. The boy escalated his monologue. A girl beside him pulled his shark backpack. He ignored her. She pulled harder. He windmilled without looking away from the guard, caught her in the shoulder. She yelped. Their teacher materialized from somewhere at a speed that suggested she'd been braced for exactly this and delivered a correction in a tone that needed no translation. 3 tourists laughed. The American couple had apparently resolved their map situation and were now taking photographs of each other. With the palace in the background, trading places with the serious efficiency of people who have a schedule. Normal. All of it normal. The machinery of a public landmark running its unremarkable course, and then the side door opened, and not the main gate. Not through any ceremonial entrance. The smaller look, door. The kind that exists on the periphery of every official place. The door that's architecturally apologetic, about itself, that seems almost embarrassed to be a door at all. Staff, usually. Aides. The quiet movement of the working interior bleeding briefly into the visible world. A woman came through at first, walking with the particular purpose of someone who doesn't walk anywhere without purpose. Dark coat, dark hair, which earpiece. Her eyes did that sweep thing. Not obvious, not dramatic, but absolute. She took in the crowd the way a calculator takes in numbers. 2 seconds behind her, a child. Small, maybe 8. Maybe 9. Children of that age have an elastic quality that makes them hard to pin to a year. She was dressed practically, not ceremonially. Dark trousers, a moss green coat with a velvet collar, hair pulled back but escaping in the particular way that children's hair always escapes, because children move with their whole bodies and don't negotiate with gravity. She was talking to someone behind her. Half-turned, mid-sentence. Her hands doing that thing children's hands do when they're trying to communicate something they don't yet have the full vocabulary for, drawing shapes in the air, emphatic, certain. The woman beside me, waterproof jacket, tour lanyard, made a sound. It was a small sound, the kind a person makes when the gap between expectation and reality suddenly collapses. "Oh," she said. "Oh, that's—" I already knew. You don't spend enough mornings at that particular stretch of pavement, watching that particular building, without developing a fluency in faces. And some faces you know the way you know the shape of a song before the lyrics start. The recognition moves through you before the thought does. The girl with the escaping hair and the green velvet coat. The hands still drawing their emphatic shapes in the gray October air. She had no idea she was being watched. That was, the thing that struck me then and strikes me still now. She was just a child, mid-sentence, trying to finish a point. I looked at Well, the guard near the center gate. The one who'd basically shifted, and he was very, very still. A different kind of still from before. Not the trained ceremonial blankness. Something underneath it, at which something alert, in the way a wire is alert. Quiet right up until it'sn't. I followed his eye line, across the forecourt, past the line of tourists and their phones and their steam breath in the cold. Past the French school children and the shark backpack and the map-resolved Americans, to the far edge of the crowd, to a man I hadn't noticed before. He wasn't doing anything, which is what made it wrong. Everyone for what it's worth, else in that space was doing something. Photographing, arguing, eating, pointing, waiting. The crowd had a texture to it, a constant low hum of purposeful movement. Even stillness in a crowd has a quality to it, the stillness of someone resting, someone watching, someone working up the nerve to approach the gate for a photograph. This man's stillness had no quality I could name. He was standing at the very edge of the tourist cluster, where the paving gives way to the stretch of road that runs between the memorial and the gate. Maybe 40, maybe older, the kind of face that doesn't give information easily, organized into lines that might have been anything. Dark jacket. Pretty much. Nothing remarkable about him. Nothing that should have snagged my eye or anyone else's. Except he wasn't looking at the palace. And he wasn't looking at the vehicles, or the memorial, or the children. He was looking at the door. I guess the side door. The apologetic staff entrance door that had just produced a woman with an earpiece and a child in a green velvet coat. His hands were in his pockets, and he was looking at that door with an attention so concentrated it had a physical quality, a weight to it. The kind of attention that's actually something else wearing attention's clothes. I felt the mist on my face. My coffee had gone completely cold, and the guard near the center gate hadn't moved. But his eyes, those eyes that had spent the last 40 minutes doing disciplined nothing, were fixed on the same point mine had just found. The man at the edge of the crowd. I looked back at the girl. She'd finished her sentence, whatever it was. The person behind her, another aide, it looked like, younger, carrying a bag, had responded. She was laughing now. That full-body, unself-conscious laugh that children do, the kind that doesn't know yet how to be smaller than its. The man at the edge of the crowd took one step forward. Well, just one, but it was a step with an intention behind it. I don't know how else to say that. And it was a step that knew where it was going. The guard's hand moved, which not dramatically. Not in any way that would have filmed well, that would have made a clip worth sharing. Just a slight, deliberate uncoupling from the position his arms had held for the last 40 minutes. A readying. The woman with the earpiece, she was 3 paces ahead of the girl, doing her sweep, doing her job, hadn't clocked it yet. The gap between the man and the edge of the formal boundary was maybe 20 feet. In a crowd that size, with that texture, 20 feet could close in under 10 seconds if someone chose to move with purpose. I looked at the guard. Plus, the guard was already moving. Later, much later, sitting in a Pret on Buckingham Gate with my hands wrapped around, something hot. Trying to organize what had happened into a sequence that made sense. I'd estimate the whole thing took about 17 seconds. Sort of. 17 seconds isn't thing. 17 seconds is the time it takes to read a text message, to pour a glass of water, to decide you don't need an umbrella and be immediately wrong about it. 17 seconds, honestly, in the right circumstances, is enormous. The guard broke position the way a sentence breaks when something urgent interrupts it, mid-beat, cleanly, without ceremony. He didn't run. I want to be precise about that, because the word run implies a scramble, a panic response, something reactive and uncontrolled. This was none of those things. He moved with the particular velocity of someone who has rehearsed urgency to the point where it no longer looks urgent. Fast, deliberate, but each step landing was exactly where it was meant to land. The bearskin made for what it's worth, him enormous as he came through the gate. An anachronism in motion, 6 feet of scarlet and fur and absolute intention, cutting through the tourist crowd the way a boat cuts through water. Not by force, but by presence. You know, people moved. Not because he pushed them. Because something in the back of the human brain, the part that still recognizes predators and authority, and the particular frequency of someone who's in playing, said, move. The French schoolchildren parted, which the map-resolved Americans stepped back without quite knowing why. The man in the beanie with the unlicensed photographs fumbled and dropped half of them. I stood there like an idiot with my cold coffee. The man sort of, at the edge of the crowd, the one with his hands in his pockets and his eyes on that door, registered the movement about 3 steps too late. You could see it happen. The exact moment his focus broke from the door and found the guard coming toward him and did the math on what that meant. His body made a decision. In my opinion, not the right one. Plus, he pulled his right hand from his pocket. No weapon, I need to say that clearly. There was no weapon. But his hand came out fast and he stepped forward, not back, which was either very stupid or very purposeful or both. And the guard was already there. Not intercepting, not tackling, nothing that would have made the 6 o'clock news the way it would need to make the 6 o'clock news to be that story. What the guard did was simpler and more absolute than any of that, while he placed himself between the man and the door. Just that. His back to the door. His face to the man, which his position making a geometry that was completely unambiguous. This is the wall, and the wall isn't moving, and whatever calculation you were running in your head, the answer has changed. The woman with the earpiece had already turned. I don't know exactly when she moved. My eyes were on the guard and the man, but by the time I looked back toward the door, she was between the girl and the situation. One hand raised in a gesture I recognized from airport security footage, from protest marshals, from anyone whose job is to redirect bodies without escalating a moment into something worse. The girl had stopped laughing. Children are better at reading rooms than adults give them credit for. They haven't learned yet to perform normality over unease. Her face had gone to that specific stillness that children's faces go to when the adult world has suddenly gotten weird. Not frightened, not yet, but present in a way that's its own kind of alarm. Eyes wide, which to be fair, body leaning very slightly toward the woman with the earpiece, the way bodies lean toward safety without meaning to. The second aide, the younger one with the bag, had come up on the girl's other side, close, casual-looking in the way that only isn't casual if you know what to look for. It took me a second to understand that this was coordination, that the woman with the earpiece and the guard and the younger aide were operating as a single system that had apparently planned for exactly this shape of moment, had run drills for it probably, that had trained the instinct so deep that the response looked almost unremarkable from 15 feet away. Almost. The man said something. I was honestly too far away to hear it. The mist had thickened slightly, and the French schoolchildren hadn't entirely processed. That sort of, they should probably stop being loud, and there was still a pigeon doing its pigeon things near the base of the memorial. But I saw his mouth move, saw the shape, you know, of words that were either an explanation or a protest or both. Pretty much. The guard didn't respond. This is the part that stays with me if I'm being honest. This is the, image that settled somewhere behind my sternum and hasn't entirely left. The guard's face. Not blank, honestly. That's the easy word for it, and it's wrong. Blank implies an absence. This was a presence. The controlled, absolute, unwavering presence that had decided the man in front of him was being handled, and that nothing he said was going to alter the geometry of the situation by a single degree. The bearskin rose above him like a dark weather system. The scarlet of his uniform was almost violent against the washed-out gray of the October morning. He was, in that moment, more wall than the wall behind him. The pretty much man's hands went back into his pockets. Another beat. 1 second, 2, where you could see him deciding, running some internal calculation about what was possible here, what the costs were, what the shape of the next minute looked like if he pushed forward versus if he didn't. He didn't. He stepped back, which not fast, not apologetically. There with the particular dignity of someone pretending they had always planned to go in this direction, that this had been the destination all along and the guard's appearance had been a coincidence rather than a cause. He turned and walked toward the far side of the memorial, away from the door, away from the gate, away from the girl in the green velvet coat, becoming just another figure dissolving into the gray-washed crowd until he was a jacket and then a shape, and then nothing at all. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. The mist had put a film of cold across my forehead. My coffee cup had bent slightly from where I'd been gripping it. Near the gate, a woman in a yellow anorak was filming on her phone. She'd been filming the whole time. People at Buckingham Palace are always filming something. But I could see from the angle of her phone that she'd caught the guard's movement, the intervention, or at least the shape of it. Whether she understood what she'd filmed was another question. Whether she even knew who had been standing at that door was another question still. The woman, with the earpiece, said something into her radio. Her hand dropped. Plus, her posture changed by a fraction. Not relaxed exactly, but whatever the step below high alert is, that. The dome of her attention widened again from narrow focus back to general. The "for what it's worth" younger aide leaned down to the girl and said something. The girl looked back toward the gate, toward the guard who had returned to position, smoothly, without drama, as though. The last 40 seconds had been a parenthesis in a sentence that was otherwise continuous, as though he'd never moved at all. But she'd seen. Even at that distance, I could tell, she'd seen enough. Not everything, not the calculation the man had been running, not the shape of the specific threat. Children that age are shielded from specifics by design, by protocol, by the people whose entire professional purpose is to make sure they never have to name what was really happening in plain language. But she'd seen the guard move, seen the sudden purposefulness, seen the woman with the earpiece turn and close the space between them. She knew something had happened. The aide, I guess, said something else. Like, the girl nodded slowly. Plus, the kind of nod that's agreeing to be walked somewhere, that's accepting the hand extended toward her. That's, for now, at this age, in this particular world she's been born into, trusting the adults to have handled the thing that needed handling. They moved back through the door and the apologetic, staff entrance, nothing to see here door. It closed, and honestly, the French school children reformed with noisy imprecision around their exhausted teacher. The shark backpack boy had acquired a pencil from somewhere and was now drawing something on his palm with the focused satisfaction of a person completing important work. The map resolved, basically. Americans were back to photographing each other. The American woman saying something about the light being better now, which it wasn't really. London had committed to gray for the day, but love makes you generous about light. The unlicensed photograph man had retrieved his dropped photographs and reorganized them with the efficient irritation of a professional resuming after an interruption. The pigeon was still doing its pigeon things. The guard stood at position near the center gate. Still. Correct. Bearskin catching the mist, and eyes at that trained middle-distance point, seeing everything that official, nothing already knew how to see. I stood there for another minute, maybe 2. My feet had gone cold inside my shoes, and the mist was graduating toward actual rain, and my coffee was a lost cause, and I should have gone. I had no reason to stay. Whatever had needed doing had been done, quietly and completely, in 17 seconds, by people who had trained their whole professional lives to make 17 seconds look like nothing at all. I stayed anyway, because something had shifted in the air of that courtyard, in the specific atmosphere of that Tuesday morning, and I needed a minute before I could convince myself I'd imagined it. I guess I hadn't imagined it. The woman actually, in the yellow anorak, lowered her phone, looked at her screen, looked back at the gate. Her, I guess, face doing the calculation, which she'd caught it. Some of it. I wondered what, in my opinion, story she'd tell about it later. I mean, over dinner. I think, a voice note to a friend. In whatever language her brain used to organize events into meaning. I wondered if the story would carry the weight of what I'd felt standing there. That low, cold current running underneath the ordinary surface of the morning. The held breath quiet that had always been there, that I'd noticed without naming, met right up until it named itself. The guard hadn't moved. The wall held. The girl was inside. The door was closed, and the mist kept coming down, indifferent and fine, the way London weather always does, as though nothing extraordinary had happened within the last 17 seconds, as though the morning was still exactly the morning it had always been, as though the gap between ordinary and catastrophic hadn't just been held open and then closed by one man stepping out of his position and placing himself in the geometry that needed filling. I turned up my collar, which started walking. The Victoria Memorial watched me go the way she watches everything, from above, gilded, patient, keeping her own counsel. I went back the next morning. I honestly don't entirely know why. I had no particular reason, no assignment, no itinerary, no one expecting photographs or notes or a story. I went back the way people return to places where something happened that they haven't finished understanding yet. The way you reread a sentence that you know means something, but can't yet say what. The palace was, doing its usual Wednesday. Thinner crowd than Tuesday. The tour buses not yet in full deployment. A woman with a double stroller was negotiating the pavement with the particular focused competence of someone who has made peace with taking up space. A teenage boy was sitting on the steps of the memorial eating something out of a paper bag, headphones in, entirely unconcerned with royalty or history or anything that didn't fit in that paper bag. Different guards today. Different positions. I found a spot near the memorial's south side. The same spot, more or less, and stood there with a better coffee this time, made that small private promise to actually drink it while it was hot, and looked at the gate. The gate looked back the way it always does, impassive, ornate, the black iron well, and the gilded points, and the vast indifferent heraldry of it all. I thought about the girl, the moss-green coat, I think, the escaping hair. The hands drawing shapes in the air while she finished a sentence she cared about finishing. I thought about what it means to grow up inside that gate. Pretty much inside that institution. What it means to be a child for whom the word normal is a concept other people have. Something she can approximate in certain rooms, in certain moments, in the company of certain people, but that disappears the second that door opens onto the world where everyone already knows your face, and some of those people, not many, but some, have decided that their relationship to your face is a thing that needs to be acted upon. What it costs, over years, to have that be the water you swim in. She'd been laughing, though. Right up until she wasn't. Mid-sentence, full body, the kind of laugh that doesn't know how to be small. That was the thing I kept coming back to. She was still, in some essential way, just a child in the middle of a sentence. The guard TBH on the south side of the gate was young, younger than I'd expected, though I don't know what I'd expected. Mid-20s, maybe. There's something almost like paradoxical about it. The ceremony of the bear skin, the ancient pageantry of the uniform, and underneath it, a person who probably has strong opinions about football and eats cereal for dinner when no one is watching. They train for years. That's what people don't always understand when they see the ceremonial stillness and mistake it for performance. The drills aren't for show. The stillness isn't theater for tourists. It is, as I'd seen yesterday, as I'd watched happen in 17 unremarkable seconds, the discipline that lets action emerge cleanly when it's needed, without the friction of hesitation, without the delay that second-guessing costs. The guard yesterday hadn't thought about whether to move. He'd already thought about it, and somewhere in the rehearsal of 1,000 mornings like this one, he'd already run the calculation, already pre-decided the answer, and so that when the moment arrived, and the man took his single purposeful step, and the geometry of the forecourt rearranged itself into something that needed addressing, the guard's body already knew. Well, that's not instinct. That's something rarer. That's trust in preparation, and that's the discipline of having practiced being ready so thoroughly that readiness stops being a state you achieve and becomes the state you simply are. I thought about the yellow anorak woman, whether she'd posted what she filmed. I'd looked last night. Searched for a while, found nothing clean, a few fuzzy clips from outside the gate that showed the guard moving but not much else, the kind of footage that raises more questions than it answers and gets filed under interesting but inconclusive by the people who run those accounts. No one like. I seemed to have the full 17 seconds. No one had the angle I'd had. I hadn't filmed it. My camera was, around my neck the whole time, and it never occurred to me to raise it, which tells me something about the state I was in. Whatever the state is where the analytical part of your brain goes quiet and the witnessing part takes over completely, the part that just absorbs rather than records. I've been trying, since then, to write it down accurately, to render the sequence in language that holds its actual weight, rather than flattening it into something more comfortable. I'm not sure I've managed it. Some moments resist their own translation. Around 9:30, a black vehicle made the turn from the north, then another. The crowd did its lean-forward thing. Phones went up. The woman with the double stroller paused, and her body making the small, involuntary pivot toward the gate. Actually, the vehicles moved through. The gate closed, which the guard on the south side hadn't moved during any of this. His eyes had done their disciplined sweep, crowd, perimeter, crowd, gate, without breaking form. From where I was standing, he looked like a man who had been standing exactly there since before time had opinions about it. I knew different. Not because I'm perceptive, particularly, or because I have some special insight into institutions I have no professional proximity to. Just because I'd been standing in that same orbit long enough, on enough gray October mornings, to have learned the difference between stillness that's decoration and stillness that's loaded. You know, the guard was loaded. All of them are. All the time. I'm the bearskin and the scarlet are the visible part. What's underneath? The years of preparation, the pre-decided answers, the geometry they practice until it becomes reflex. That's the part the tourists don't see and aren't meant to see. Because the whole point of it's that you never need to see it. Because by the time you see it, the work is already done. Yesterday, for 17 seconds, I'd seen it. And the girl in the green coat had gotten back through her door. I drank my coffee. Actually drank it this time while it was still warm enough to be worth the effort. A woman nearby was explaining to her daughter, maybe 6, 7, round-faced and determined, wearing a raincoat the color of a traffic cone, what the guards were for. She was pretty much doing her best with it. In the way parents do their best with big questions using small words. They keep people safe, she said. In my opinion, that's their job. Keeping the important people safe. The girl in the traffic cone raincoat considered this with full philosophical seriousness. Who keeps them safe? She asked, and her mother laughed. The kind of laugh that's surprised into being that arrives before the person is ready for it. That's a good question, she said. I turned away before I could hear whether she answered it. Walked north along the mall under the trees that were already going to their autumn reds and golds, the ones. That make that particular avenue look, on the right morning, like something out of a story someone invented to make the world feel more meaningful than it actually is. The palace receded behind me. And the guard. Whichever guard, today's guard, yesterday's guard, the one I'd watched move with the precision of a person who had already answered all the urgent questions, stood at position. In my opinion, still. Correct. Eyes at the middle distance, seeing everything, which saying nothing. The gate held its geometry against the gray October sky, and I walked until the sounds of the crowd thinned out, and the pigeons had the mall more or less to themselves. And London went on being London the way London always does, enormous, indifferent, quietly extraordinary, going about its business. I read a couple days later that Princess Charlotte had made a public appearance later that same week, a children's hospital in East London, the kind of engagement that appears in 2 paragraphs on the royal family's website. Maybe a photo, and a formal one, where she's smiling in the particular composed way that children learn to smile when smiling is required. In the photograph her coat was navy blue. Her hair was properly contained. She looked fine. She looked, to anyone reading that 2-paragraph item with their morning coffee, like a child doing a public duty in an ordinary week. Like the week had been ordinary, like Tuesday morning had been ordinary. I looked at the photograph for a long time. Then I closed the tab. Some things are kept safe in plain sight, and the keeping is invisible because the people doing it are very, very good at their job. Good enough that the world gets to go on believing the ordinary is ordinary, that the gap between fine and not fine is wider than it sometimes is, that a child in a green velvet coat finishing a sentence she cared about finishing is just a child finishing a sentence. The guards make that belief possible. They stand at the edge of the visible world where it meets the one most people never see, and they hold the line between them with a stillness that looks like ceremony and is something much older than ceremony, something closer to, for what it's worth, a promise. I folded, basically, the thought away somewhere behind my sternum where the other ones live, the ones that arrive at places like that on gray Tuesday mornings in the mist, when the coffee is already cold and the world is doing its unremarkable thing and 17 seconds opens between one moment and the next like a door. Some doors like you don't walk through, because someone already decided long before you arrived, that they'd stand there instead, and